We are really, really privileged to have with us Ken Costa. I had somebody yesterday, a student, actually say, I was so thrilled to know that Kevin Costner was going to be with us. And I had to break it to him. No, a different kind of thrill that we've got to have. And he didn't come up with Costa Coffee, did you? No, Ken did not come up with Costa Coffee. He is a financial advisor. He's worked in the city for the last 40 years. He's been listed among the 5 top financial advisors in the last 25 years. He has been the chairman of Lazard. He's been the vice chairman of UBS. He managed the sale of Harrods. He knows Muhammad Al-Fayed. In fact, he had tea with him yesterday. And we're going to find out all about that as we welcome to the stage Ken Costa, everybody. Excellent. Go, come closer. Come on.
I'm worried. You guys yourself waxed. I'm worried. I don't want to get too close.
Trampas did a good job. Great. So, and you've got your book with you, author of 2 books.
Got a book? Yeah.
Yeah.
Know Your Why?
Know Your Why. We're going to get to that.
We're going to get to that.
Okay. And do you have a suitcase of them to sell?
We have a suitcase of it, but you know what? We'll do a special deal.
Ah.
We're not going to sell it. What we'll do is we'll give you a copy, or some of you, on condition that if you like it, you buy one for a friend. How about that?
Okay. That's, the art of the deal right here with Ken Costa.
Donald Trump.
It is Donald Trump. Have you ever met Trump?
Not prepared to answer.
Oh, okay. So there's all sorts of secret cabals with Putin and Ken Costa and Donald Trump, and they sit down and they rule the world.
Whatever fantasy you want.
Now, come on, but you do sit down around tables full of rich and famous kinds of people. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, you've been doing this kind of thing, haven't you?
Yep, I have been. I just got back sort of feeling a bit of the sort of jet lag from visiting Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, where I was doing some work there, but also amazingly just seeing a young generation, just like many of you here, finding faith in Jesus Christ and wanting to make a real difference to the world around them. So we had 70 key leaders from 15 different Asian countries come and be with us. So yeah, I do that, and it's wonderful to have a sort of twin track of being able to do both things.
And both things are... There's this kind of very overtly Christian side to all that you spend your time doing. So you've been the chairman of Alpha. We might speak about that a little bit later.
Sure.
And very heavily involved at Holy Trinity Brompton, the biggest church in the Church of England, and involved in church planting around the world. But also there's this financial side. You're also a banker.
Yes.
Yeah, and you happily own that label.
Yeah, well, it's a label. There's nothing I can do about it. I am, and I think that one of the great things is that you get to, Jesus calls us, no such thing as a sacred or a secular world. I mean, I think that there's one world, and the Lord of the money markets is the Lord of mercy, the Lord of prayer is the Lord of profit, the Lord of compassion is the Lord of competition. I mean, there is one God. There isn't a sort of separate God for sort of churchy guys and separate God for the guys like us who have to work.
Yeah.
But
and you can serve gods either in a church or in the money markets.
Preferably both. I don't draw a distinction to that because I think your worship station is your workstation.
Yeah.
I think you worship God where He's called you to work. I do believe in calling. We'll come on to that. So it's been a privilege of my life the last 40 years to be able to be in the workplace, and it's a tough place. I don't have to tell you, soon you're going to find out. And it's not easy. There are harsh commercial compromises that have to be reached every day. Life is doesn't run smoothly.
Yeah.
But He is there, and that makes a huge difference. And I think when we face the world at the moment, it really is a scary place. I mean, it's. I was at a conference in New York a few months ago, and in that room, there were only 100 people in the room, and it was meant to sort of try and work out how we could hold the whole sort of show together. And
by the show, you just mean the global financial system?
Yeah, the world. I was only making.
Thank you, Ken.
I was making the coffee. Don't worry, it's a good brand of coffee. But the interesting thing was that. One of the and people in that room controlled a third of the world's assets, $40 trillion worth of assets. They were serious people, and we were trying to work out just how we would describe the world. And one of the really key leaders said, it was VUCA, the world at the moment is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's angry. And you just check any newspaper, watch any TV feed or any stream that you want to, and you'll see that pent-up anger worldwide, wherever you are. And it occurred to me, we're trying to find solutions for it. There aren't any. The pundits, the politicians, the policymakers, they really haven't got a serious answer. But what the world most needs, I believe the good news of Jesus Christ provides.
Amazing. And so those two halves of your life actually do meet together and make sense together.
Yeah, because otherwise if they don't meet together, then what happens is, you get two worlds colliding.
Yeah.
And that's no good. There is a great a verse of scripture that says, in Christ Jesus, all things hold together. So there's one holding together in my life at home, in the gym, on holiday, at school, at university, at work. It's all one, there is one holding together. There's no sort of separation. You don't divide myself up in two.
And we'll talk about later how you hold together things like principle and profit and that kind of thing, which is a massive issue, I'm sure. But should we go back to the beginning? And figure out...
to rewind the tape.
Rewind the tape, and go back to where you came from. You were born in South Africa, went to a whites-only boarding school, a whites-only university, growing up in apartheid in South Africa, and at some point realizing, hang on, this is wrong, deeply wrong.
Yeah, I think, when I was the equivalent of the people sitting in front here, I had a passion for justice, and the injustice around was just awful, and it just sort of... It really hit me very hard. And what particularly hit me then was that the whole sort of Christian church seemed all to be muddled up with the maintenance of a pretty fascist organisation, being the government. And I really reacted against that, became a student activist, and got into trouble for doing certain things.
Quite a bit of trouble, actually.
Well, here and there.
Here and there. You were required to leave the country at times, or no?
Well, I certainly left, after a number of there were a number of us who were student leaders, and they were all rounded up, and they got locked up, and I managed to come to university in England.
In England, and so your life in South Africa, you grew up in a kind of a nominally Catholic kind of home.
Yeah.
But I guess the first thing to really grip you ideologically was Marxism. Is that right?
It was. I think that when I really came to, you have to realize just how brutal a regime can be, that I thought that in the concept of Marx, which was Marx's concept of man, of humankind, that there was a certain way that he really did understand the human condition, and that there was only one way forward, and that would have been an overthrow of that regime. So one naturally embraced that, and they were dark times. Nelson Mandela was in Robben Island at the time. It looked as if it was a leaderless community, and there was very little that, sort of hope that one had there.
Yes. And so if we had asked you aged 20, who is Jesus? What are you thinking about him at this stage?
He's a guy who hung out in the hood somewhere for some of the people, but didn't really make much of a difference when you face this massive injustice.
Right.
In front of you every time. You can't... You can't mix with people. You have to be entirely separate. And what kind of God was that?
Yeah. So very different from what we've just been describing. All things hold together in Christ is what you believe now. Back then, he's this peripheral, interesting figure, but real life is about class struggle and racial struggle and yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you came to Cambridge to read law. Is that right?
I did. Yes, I'd read law and philosophy in Johannesburg University, and then. Came to Cambridge to sort of carry on with law studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was at this stage that you really encountered, I guess, kind of something a bit like this, a university event kind of...
Yeah, not as good as this. I have to say, guys, honestly, whoever's organised this is absolutely brilliant. Don't you think so?
Yeah, man.
And give them a big hand. It was much more stuffy, etc. But there was a message, and that message was actually that, at that stage, I felt that sort of, sort of sense that there's a gap in one's life. Everything was going smoothly, we were having a great time, enjoying it as students do, but there was something really missing in the middle of my life, which I realized then that, Marx couldn't fulfill. No philosophy could fulfill that, because at the end of the day, it could talk about economic freedom, but not about the freedom of an ordinary person to be able to live in a relationship with a person called Jesus Christ, and that was a completely transforming experience.
So obviously your view of Jesus is now changing. So suddenly he's someone that you need to get to know.
Yes.
Who is a towering personality.
Yeah, I mean we had a gathering like this, and some kind friends took me along to a place like this. And if there's anybody here who's being brought along to hear this, it is a great thing. I assure you, not often in life will you have the time to be able to just sit down and say, well, who is this person, Jesus? And so we went to a gathering like this. Somebody said to me, you should read something about him in a modern translation. I chose Mark's Gospel because it was the shortest.
Time is money, right?
And read Time is Money. Well, it now is, wasn't there? Time isn't money for students, but it's great fun nonetheless. And I read through this and I thought to myself, there is a suspicious ring of truth about this writing. I can't tell you that it's 100% true, but having read the whole thing, there's a person called Jesus, and either he was crazy, or actually I want to be serious and find out more about him. And I realized that the thing you have to do is simply to say, I want to start this journey with you, will you help me start?
Yes.
And so we started on a journey. It wasn't an easy journey, because I was bargaining with God.
Were you bargaining?
Even then, sort of, I was going to be a banker, I suppose. So my bargaining with God went as follows. Lord, okay, you're God, I'm me, so why don't we just set up a sort of partnership in university? You have kind of 50 and I'll have 50, and we'll sort of, we'll coexist together. It'll be great fun. I can enjoy a bit of you, and you can enjoy a bit of me.
He was thrilled by that offer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Why not? I mean, I was making the offer. So. But then I realized, I felt very unsettled in my spirit, as I think some of you will be feeling now. You're looking for something, and I thought after a long struggle, and it was a sort of personal agony struggle, really was difficult, I didn't know that there was a thing called praying, so I was mentally agitated, and then she said, okay, 51%, you can take control of my life.
Controlling stake to go.
Controlling stake, and as anybody knows, if you go into finance one day, the only 1% that makes a difference is the difference between 50 and 51. So, and I thought that was it, and I still didn't feel comfortable. And then eventually, after a long struggle, I realized that I was an obstacle to what God wanted to do. He wanted to give the very best of life to my life. And I said, okay, God, all of it, you can have all of it, all my life. I don't know what it means, but I kind of have a suspicious thing that if you did what you said you did in the book that I read, then actually this is true. And if it's true, I want to go that way. I don't want to go anywhere else. And the moment I just said that, I remember just going on my knees and just saying, God, I want to start a journey with you. Will you help me? And at that moment, an extraordinary sense of peace, the whole sort of sense of struggle and agitation came to a sort of end. And I'm hugely grateful for those friends who were helping me during that time. Because you enter a community, it's not a kind of thing you're saying, okay, God, here you are, like. But you enter into a community of people that become the best friends of your life, and the people that I met there are still some of my closest friends.
Right.
And we've journeyed together. And life is a journey, it's a story. It's an unfolding story with a difference that it's true.
Yeah. And so not just this vertical moment with Jesus, but you're talking about this horizontal, being hooked into a community, these friends, these co-travelers, other Christians, church family.
Yeah, and I mean, the amazing thing is that wherever you travel in the world, and I have the privilege of having to go to shareholders' meetings where the owners and the founders of businesses turn up. Sometimes they come to the meetings, sometimes they don't come to the meetings. But the fact of the matter is that wherever you go to a Christian meeting, the founder, Jesus Christ, always turns up.
Right.
And it's different people, different cultures, different ideas. So you're drawn into this amazing worldwide community of people.
Yeah.
And it's not just a sort of, me and me alone, and I'm the only one that matters.
Yes. So how stunning to go to Kuala Lumpur last week and to go to Singapore, and you've got 17 nations represented, but you're all your brothers and sisters, you're one, you're united.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go on the journey alone. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
But you go on it with a group of people, and that at the end of the day, we're pursuing something that the world most needs. It needs to know that there is a God and he does actually love the world with all its stresses, with all its pain, with all the crap around it. There is something that is genuinely true about the Christian message. It's good news.
And some of your co-travelers at that stage were people called Nicky Gumbel.
Heard of him?
Yeah. Some will have heard of him. Some won't have. Nicky Gumbel, Nicky Lee, Justin Welby. Some people might.
Yeah, he landed a good job afterwards. Yeah.
With the oil industry, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why he left the oil industry.
That's your perspective of that. Yeah. So Nicky Gumbel, Nicky Lee are ministers in Holy Trinity Brompton.
Yeah.
The church that you are a church warden of, and
yeah.
Largest church in the Church of England.
Yeah.
So and they became Christians right around the same time.
Yeah, we roughly, we journeyed together, and we've sort of continued to meet. And I'd say to anyone here, honestly, treasure the friendships that you make here at university. Treasure them. Look, spend time on them. They'll guide you through the rest of your days. And we've continued to meet with each other over the years and stayed in touch, and holidays together, etc. And it's a journey together. I mean, this is what gives meaning to life in a very sort of siloed and fragmented world, where the pressures are just enormous on individuals.
So here we've got Nicky Gumbel becomes a famous minister of the gospel. Nicky Lee becomes a famous minister of the gospel. Justin Welby becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Ken Costa becomes a banker, right? And
there are worse things.
Name one.
Politician.
You've been quite happy about the developments of the last year, haven't you? Because suddenly there's someone worse than bankers now.
We're pretty low down. As you're screaming down to the bottom, it's not the place you want to be.
Yeah.
Think of Leicester. And Chelsea is.
Yes, we got a Chelsea man here.
Sure. Who isn't?
Who isn't?
We're supposed to be talking about serious things, mate.
We are. So let me stick the knife in now. Now that you've said that.
I knew the knife is coming. That's why I'm dodging.
So Jesus talks about unrighteous mammon, and he talks about you can serve either God or mammon. He says things like, "Do not store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven." Bible talks about, in the old translations, filthy lucre, which I think is a fantastic phrase, filthy lucre. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, which is commonly mistranslated as money is the root of all evil. But
it's a great speech.
It's a great speech. So how do you reconcile that kind of teaching from the Bible with pursuing a life in banking?
Because there isn't a distinction. When people say that, how can you be a banker and a Christian? The question is, well, how can you be anything and a Christian? You are either called to this great community of Jesus Christ, in which there is no distinction between those that are doing full-time Christian work paid for by a church and those that are, computer programmers, accountants, bankers. And so, yes, there are tensions, and there is a tension every day, because we live in this world, but we don't have the values of this world. So every day is a struggle. It's not easy, which means that you have to say, look, I know that I'm equipped by God to have, that there's space for faith in the workplace. And when you talk about don't lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, the operative word is for yourself.
Right.
So I think you need to break that sort of selfishness and be generous in your time, in your energy, in your money. But you genuinely need to know that God has actually called you to be in that workplace. There's a purpose for being there. It's not some random event that you happen to be doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting how people mistranslate that verse, isn't it? It's not money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil.
Well, that's true, but that it's so interesting that when Jesus talks about, that you'd either, how can you serve God and mammon? You love the one and hate the other. Those words, love and hate, are not commercial words. They're not economic words. They're words of relationship. So the question is money going to have a greater grip on you than the relationship with God? And believe me, if I've learned one thing, I assure you, and if I can give you one piece of advice for the rest of your life, don't underestimate the power of money. It is very seductive, It is very compelling. And the sooner you make the change in your heart and say, look, I want a relationship with God that enables me to enjoy all things. The Bible says, I've given you all these things to enjoy richly, including, money and pleasure and all these other things God has given us, but not when it becomes the dominant driving part of the life that you're leading.
But it can be a trap, a huge temptation. Where and how do you feel the temptation of money?
Well, the temptation is there all the time. You want more. You always want to. You're never satisfied. I tell you, interesting. I don't know if you've seen the film Silence, the new Scorsese film. And Andrew Garfield went to find out what made these missionaries tick in Japan. The early missionaries that went there.
Andrew Garfield, the actor who plays
the priest in the film. Yeah, absolutely. And he said, he fell in love with Jesus, and then he said that he realized in his life the greatest difficulty was not enoughness. That there was not enough. He couldn't get enough. He couldn't get enough money. Couldn't get enough sex. Couldn't get enough drugs. Couldn't get enough of publicity. Couldn't get enough. And I think you can drive yourself on this not enoughness, always unsettled, not enough friends who like me, whenever it happens to be, until you get to that peaceful place of knowing, this God actually made the world. He gave us a prospectus, we call it the Bible, how one can run one's life in a sort of kind of orderly way and enjoy the good things that he's given us without being totally thrown offside and burnt out. The silent killer of our generation is being burnt out.
Right.
And that's a major problem.
Where does that come from? Why?
Well, it comes from the fact that you don't have, I think, that there isn't any overall sense of purpose, direction, calling, destiny of a whole generation.
Mm-hmm.
And the pressure is growing. It's the always-on generation. Your smart is always on. It can tell you wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell from it, who you like, who you don't like, swiping left, swiping right, whether you're naughty boy, naughty girl. You can get a picture that governs your life, and it looks as if your whole life is going to come out of this machine.
Yes.
So the pressure continues 24/7. We're not wired to live like that. We have to learn limits. We have to learn to live well. We need to live enjoyably, and therefore, I think, live the way in which God intended us to live, so that we have the best of life.
So social media is kind of fragmenting us, and we are our own press secretaries, always trying to, manage our image, and attention's being pulled in lots of different directions. I guess also the marketplace and the workplace is changing so much as well.
Absolutely. The workplace. You're going to go in. When I started out, I might have thought I'd have 2 or maybe 3 jobs in my life. There's not a person listening to me now that won't have at least 10 or a dozen. You'll start something in a big firm, you'll go to something smaller, you do a startup, it'll pivot into something else. And the pressure on you is going to be enormous. The pressure of, I don't really know. Don't know whether you want to talk about knowing your why yet.
It sounds like a good time.
But it sounds like a good time to know your why, which is to find and fulfill the reason that you're on this planet. Now, because you've got such pressure and such choice, it's a multi-choice world. You have more choice now than any other generation. There is this ability you have to learn to be able to be content where you are, but allow God to move you on to various different stages of your life. And that's the sort of issue I deal with in this book, because this is the key issue for this generation, is the issue of identity, of who I am, and how can I find out what that unique gifting that God has given me can be expressed to make a difference for mankind and in humankind. It's not, ask me if I was honest, what was the principal motivation when you started out in life, finishing as a university student? Was I needed the money and I wanted the money.
Yeah.
This is a generation that's so different. You guys have choices of such a kind that has never been known to a previous generation, and how you steward those choices and how you link them into one holistic, life-giving, life-changing, life-inducing way of life is really the challenge of our time.
Has it surprised you when you ask people, what is your why? What is your reason? Has it surprised you how few people can answer that directly?
Well, it's so interesting. It is exactly the same issue that the guy sitting in front of me last week in Singapore, or in South Africa, or in the States, where wherever I've been traveling, it's a generational issue, and it is because the generation has, it is of the best generations, I think, that has ever been there. You've got amazing technology, and yet it has caused this deep angst and this terrible FOMO, the sort of fear of missing out in the lives. And at the root of it is the fact that you can't quite believe that actually I am called by God. And there's three things that really matter: that you're loved by God, that you're known by God, and that you're called by Him. And that's transformed my own life.
Yeah.
And those three things, are it's security in the identity that I matter, not just my church life, but everything. How I play games, and where I'm going to work, and who I'm going to work for, and life partners, places to live, places to work, are all part of this hugely challenging, difficult, but exciting journey of the Christian life.
And calling for you there is that there's nothing accidental about where God has placed me.
No, because when John's Gospel that you're going through talks about, you haven't chosen me. This is Jesus speaking. I have chosen you, and so he makes it perfectly clear to every person in this room. Look, I've got a plan for you, and your choice is to go it alone. There's no reason why you shouldn't do so, but it's not life. It's not life in its fullness. He chooses you, therefore it's not a random event that brings you here to listen, that brings you to this university. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can Google God. You can't just suddenly say, oh, well, what's my life purpose? We work it out. We work it out with other people. We test each other. We do so, I go through it in here as to how you get to know your why.
Now, you do this kind of work with young up-and-coming leaders and trying to get them to know their reason and that kind of thing. Does it also work with your colleagues who are high-powered bankers and that sort of thing?
Absolutely, because what happens is that the pressure continues all the way through, because the pressures of the workplace mean that you've got to try and hold yourself together against pressures that are almost impossible to withstand. So you have to draw the limits on your life,
right,
so that you're able to give of your best, and you know that there are changes that are rapidly occurring. And because there is an aging generation, the workplace is changing, as technology sort of disrupts the whole way in which the workplace is changing, and the speed of singularity, artificial intelligence, and all of that. And you couple that with living longer, you realize that knowing your why continues right the way through the whole of one's life, which is why it's so important to actually ground it now.
Yeah.
Whatever time you spend now in actually getting a grip of saying, what, this is the life I really want to lead, and I obviously would urge you to say that I want to live it in a relationship with Jesus Christ and with the people around me. It'll pay huge dividends in later life.
Yesterday we had the gang leader, so we were talking to Ryan Lennon, so from a very underprivileged, very difficult background in Northern Ireland, and he found Christ there. But I wonder whether actually it's an even more difficult mission field among the rich and famous.
Well,
I feel like they've got it all together.
Well, yeah, because money is very seductive.
Yeah.
It buys you freedom, buys you great holidays, and it sort of takes away some of the needs, so that you can be miserable, but at least you're comfortable in your misery. That's not a great trade.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, I was just talking to a very great friend of mine, perhaps one of the wealthiest guys in the city of London, had the most fantastic life in every way, amazing abilities to enjoy holidays any and everywhere, any number of women, etc., etc. And one day, he confronted Jesus Christ. He read a book, and he realized that this was true, and suddenly he realized that there was this extraordinary power which money could never buy, which was forgiveness.
Right.
And he turned to me and said to me, Ken, why didn't you tell me earlier about this extraordinary power of forgiveness. He said, look, I don't know that I can buy the whole deal on Christianity, and I'm probably going to be weak on certain areas. But the one thing I do know, and I'll never forget it, is actually that this forgiveness is absolutely real. You know, I know it, I can feel it, and it's at the cornerstone of the whole of the Christian life, that Jesus Christ died for us in order to enable us to know that sort of forgiveness, the guilt for, you know, sort of harming and hurting people, parents and other people that have harmed or hurt us, and you know, the shame that we feel over the actions that we've taken which we wish were not there.
Yeah, and that's what really frees us. Two final questions. So we asked what you would have said about Jesus age 20, and you said, you know, he was there in the hood. Was that your phrase? He was there in the hood.
You're learning.
Yes. And then, so what would you say today? Like, if someone says, describe to me, who is Jesus to you today, Ken Costa?
He has become, over the years, an extraordinary close friend. I mean, it's weird, isn't it, to sort of use language like that? But he is a person that one can talk to. That's what praying is. You sense him around the place, even though you can't work out exactly. He is the most gracious person that you could imagine. I'm so struck by the fact that he was the freest person who ever lived. Obviously, when I started life, recognizing that terrible lack of freedom, that Jesus was the one that could provide freedom. You know, he was able to wash people's feet, and yet allowed a woman to come and wash his feet. Well, that's an astonishing degree of freedom. So, you know, it's just there is a person who is a friend, but also by the Spirit of God who comes to enable us to understand these things. He draws alongside and kind of helps to see what that future might look like. Doesn't spell it out, we're not sort of clairvoyant, but he's there as a close friend, expressing an incredible love, even and particularly in the harshness of the working environment, in the painful breaking in relationships. You see this extraordinary healing power of somebody he's got my back, he's got skin in my game, he wants the best for me. And yeah, you know, I screw up, and you know, he sort of, you say sorry, mean it, and he comes back, and it's that sense that he has life in all its fullness. You know, not sort of tiny bit of life, because so often people know a bit about God, know about Jesus, and they know just enough about him to be miserable.
Right.
But he is the one that frees us up to live this extraordinary life in this extraordinary, brilliant generation. I mean, you're a caring and sharing generation like no other before. And he is the one that inspires this desire to care for others, to share your stuff, to share your goods, to, you know, as this world is so changing, this whole concept of a sharing society is, of course, rooted in the servant nature, the community nature that Jesus has.
Amazing, and what a compelling and attractive vision. So final question, if you had some time with people here who they've given up an evening tonight and maybe they're giving up more time this week, how would you counsel someone who is investigating into the Christian faith? What would you say to them?
I mean, I would say, I can honestly say this as honestly as I can, you have an absolutely unique time now. You will never have it again, when you're able to think through some of the big issues of life, and not only think through them, actually talk them through with other people who don't mind being talked to. You're living together, you don't have to travel halfway across the city to meet up or to have a drink with somebody. use this time to get to know the person of Jesus Christ. Even if you come to the conclusion, do you know what, it just doesn't work. It's a nice story that Ken and others have been telling, but it doesn't work for me. It doesn't matter what your conclusion is. Well, I think it does, but what I would urge more than anything else, rather than set yourself up to waste the rest of your life, know that you're known, that you're loved, and that you're called by God, and work it out now to get to that point where you could remember that Jesus said, I came to give you life in all its fullness, in all the rich kaleidoscope of life. I've come to give it to you. And ask yourself whether, isn't there something worth following, and start that journey together with others. That's the advice I'd give.
It's fantastic advice. Very, very good advice, and I hope that everybody here takes it. Now, if people want to come and get your book, where are you going to be? How's that going to happen?
Well, Mark James will be back at the back there, if I can find him.
Okay.
And for the first however number you get it, but there is a deal to it. You know, if you take it,
yeah,
it'll help you answer some of those real questions. How do I know what my calling is? Take it, read it, and if you do, the deal is you buy one for a friend, which you can get from Amazon.
Very good deal. Very good deal. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Costa.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you just flip to page 60, this book is called Uncover John. It's a copy of John's Gospel from the Bible, so it's just an eyewitness account of Jesus' life. And yeah, we're going to be looking, page 60, if you look down, chapter 10, I'm going to be reading from verse 7, so when we're there. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate, and whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father.
So, do you know your why? Such a great question, isn't it? Do you know your why? Do you know your reason for life? If I said to you, I want you to come back this time next week. Same time, same place, same location. Come back here next week. What are you going to say? You're going to say, why? And what if I say back to you, just come? Well, you'll say, but why? And I'll say, well, others will be there. And you'll say, but why? And I'll say, well, don't you trust me? Why won't you just come here next week, same time, same place? You're going to say, Glenn, you're a maniac. Why should I come? Why should I give up an evening? Why should I give up an hour of my life to come to this thing that you're inviting me into? We need a why to give up a single hour of our lives. And pretty much every hour of your life is already spoken for. And if I ask you to spend an hour of your time with me, you need a pretty good reason to do it. The huge tragedy in life is that we spend about 700,000 hours in our lives, and so many of us don't even spend a single one of them assessing what the why is for the whole thing. You'd need a why to come back here, same time, same place, next week. Please don't do it, there's nothing going on, okay? You need need a really good reason to give up an hour of your life. And yet so many of us don't even spend an hour of our life to wonder what the 700,000 are all about. Isn't that tragic? The Christian Union, whether you're a member of the Christian Union or not, they're doing you a huge service. Because you get to spend some time this week, and then ongoingly, you get to spend some time thinking about what the ultimate why is, what the ultimate reason is. And Ken was talking about how the need for a reason is so much more intense these days. There are all sorts of reasons for that. Yeah, social media is part of it. Yeah, a changing workplace situation is a part of it. I wonder whether there are also big worldview issues going on. Maybe you don't want to plumb the depths of the why question because you suspect very strongly that there is no why. Maybe you don't want to spend your time thinking about reasons because you're pretty convinced that deep down there aren't any. I mean, if we are just biological survival machines, perched on an insignificant planet hurtling through a meaningless universe towards eternal extinction, maybe I don't want to plumb too deeply into that reality. Maybe that won't help me to discover whether I should do a PGCE next year or not. You know, maybe that's a bit like going on the beach and kind of drawing patterns in the sand when the tidal wave is coming to sweep me away. And if the tidal wave of eternity is coming to sweep me away, maybe I'm not really going to spend any time facing that tidal wave. Maybe I'm just going to turn my back on what I think to be reality. Maybe I'll just hunker down and make the best I can of my own little life. And maybe I'll stop asking the why questions, because I don't really think there's an answer. Not an answer that's livable. And so we split ourselves in two. We believe on the one hand that we are these biological survival machines, these wet robots. We believe on the one hand that maybe actually at the end of the day my psychology just boils down to my biology just boils down to my chemistry just boils down to my physics just boils down to quarks and leptons fizzing, and that's who I am. And maybe that is bedrock reality. Okay, let's park that to one side, and now let's try to live a meaningful life over here. But never the twain shall meet. Because if I'm just quarks and leptons fizzing, that doesn't give me a really fine meaning to my life. It doesn't give me a motivation that will survive all the storms of life that are coming. Maybe we're not asking the why question because we are deep down convinced that underneath it all there is blind, pitiless indifference. That's a phrase that Richard Dawkins used. When he looked at the universe, he says, you look at the universe out there, it has exactly the properties we should expect if at bottom there is nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And yet this book is telling a different story. This book is telling a different story of meaning and hope. We thought about on Monday how back in the Old Testament Moses sung a song, and one of the lines of the song was, "Underneath are the everlasting arms." Now that's a different story, isn't it? On the one hand, underneath all things, says Richard Dawkins, is blind, pitiless indifference. Why would you want to press into that story to discover your meaning? Here's another story that says, underneath it all are the everlasting arms, arms of love, personal arms of love and joy and hope. See, in Christianity, we're offering you the chance to discover a meaning to life that does not require you to turn away from the reality, the harsh reality of a meaningless existence. We're actually asking you to think ever deeper about what life might ultimately be about. Maybe this book is true. Maybe this book really does give us a foundation, a grounding for meaning that can sustain us through all the storms of life. That's what Ken has found. That's what the Christians in this room have found. It's what I've found. That there really is someone who gives us a why that is worth living for. At the world, there are all sorts of reasons to think that life is ephemeral, to think that we are just perishing, to wonder if there is a real anchor that can hold through the storm. Back in the Old Testament, there's the book of songs that's called the book of Psalms. There's 150 of them that express all sorts of emotions towards God. And in one of the Psalms, Psalm 103, It says that we are like the flower of the field that flourishes. And it's a beautiful image, isn't it? That the flower of the field that flourishes. Here you are at Durham. You are flourishing. You are beautiful. You are fragrant. You are in the prime of life, okay? That's what you are. But the very next verse says, and then the wind blows, and it's gone, and its place remembers it no more. That's life, isn't it? That's life. You see, generation come and generation go. Like the flower of the field, we flourish for a while, and then the wind blows, and it is no more, and its place remembers it no more. That's so much about this transitory nature of life, isn't it? And yet that psalm goes on. The very next verse says, but from everlasting to everlasting, the Lord's love is with those who fear him. So interesting. We might put our roots down into the sinking sands of this world, and we are here today and gone tomorrow, but the Bible gives us this other opportunity. Can you get connected to the everlasting love of God? From everlasting to everlasting. There is this God of love and light and life, and you can get connected to him. So that through all the storms of life, you have an anchor for your soul. And so that now you can become a conduit of life and light and love and hope for all who are around you. You can find that calling in your life to spread the God of love in a world of shifting sands. Wouldn't that give you a meaning? That would totally give you a meaning. And Jesus Christ here in John's Gospel claims to be the very one who can anchor you into this everlasting love. Verse 10 on the top of page 62. If you've still got it open, fantastic verses to think through. Jesus is speaking, and at the top of page 62 he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. It's incredible. Jesus does not come and say, I've got a series of teachings, and if you jump through these 17 hoops, then you will discover the principles of life. He says he is life. He is the life source. He is this source of being that comes into planet Earth, and it's a really exultant kind of picture of who Jesus is. But what is his picture of who we are in this verse? He says, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. What is he assuming about us on planet Earth? He's basically saying, you guys are not living. You're existing. You're breathing. Your heart is beating. But you're not alive. Not really, not truly, not with God's life. See how that's a bit offensive? It's quite offensive, isn't it? If someone comes to you and they look at your life and they say, that's no life. That's no life. We get offended, don't we? The God of heaven has shown up. He's looked at planet Earth and he said, that's no life. You're just existing. But I have come that you might have life and have it in all its fullness. And we go, who do you think you are, Jesus? Who do you think you are telling the world that it's really spiritually dead? Who do you think you are? Well, he goes on, verse 11. This is the highlighted verse. I am the good shepherd. Now this is a jaw-dropping claim from Jesus. Everyone who's listening into Jesus, they've been schooled on those psalms, those songs from the Old Testament. And the most famous one, perhaps you know it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. Famously, all throughout the Old Testament, it's God who is the good shepherd. He is the one who leads us, who guides us, who helps us to find green pastures. All the political leaders of the Old Testament and all the religious rulers, they were constantly under this accusation that they were bad shepherds. They were leading the people astray. They were just selfish. They were just hypocrites. There's only one good shepherd in the Bible. It's God. And so Jesus comes down to planet Earth and he says, that's me. I am the good shepherd. I wonder what you make of that claim by Jesus. There it is in black and white. I am the good shepherd. Jesus makes these claims on every page of John's Gospel. I really recommend you pick this up and keep on reading. But strap yourself in, because Jesus on every page of this book is claiming to be the God who made you. He's claiming to be the source of being. He routinely tells people that he is older than the universe. He routinely tells people, if you want to know what God looks like, keep looking right here, okay? This is Extraordinary for any human being to say, but Jesus is relentless. He keeps on claiming to be the good shepherd, to be the source of life. He keeps on claiming to be your maker. Because according to the Bible, he is the Son of God. When the Bible thinks of who God is, it thinks of a family. There's a father always loving his son in the joy of the Holy Spirit. Jesus is that son. That very chip off the old block. The very heart of the Father. The very mouthpiece of God, as Rue Paynes called him on Monday. And there he comes to planet Earth and he says, I've always been receiving this Holy Spirit, always full of this life. I have come that you might have life and have it in all its fullness. Who are you, Jesus? I am your maker. I am the good shepherd. And we think, oh yeah? Prove it. Prove it. Don't know what you think would be a good proof of divinity. If someone is foolish enough, blasphemous enough, insane enough to claim to be God's, what do we expect them to do in order to prove their claim? You know, we'd expect them to do something fantastic, like, you know, have a mountaintop blow and volcanoes erupt, or, you know, having donkeys tap dance and sing show tunes, or something really extraordinary, and, you know, that's what we'd expect. You know how Jesus proves that he is God in this sentence? He says, I will prove to you that I'm God. Watch me die. That's interesting, isn't it? I'm going to prove that I'm God. See how I bleed to death. This is an interesting claim, because this is an interesting God. Don't you think? This is a very interesting claim, and this is a very interesting God. I don't know what you make of God this evening. I don't know even if you think he's there. As I said the other night, I think a good question to ask yourself if you don't believe in God is, which God don't you believe in? Because we might find all sorts of agreement on the God that you don't believe in. You might find that the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in, and that Christians don't believe in. I am not generally predisposed to the idea of some kind of theistic reality. I couldn't give two hoots about the concept of there being some kind of God. I've met Jesus in these pages, and I've looked at him and I've gone, if this is what God's like, I'm in. Lord Byron, the poet, I've already quoted him this week, but he famously said, if God is not like Jesus Christ, he ought to be. I think he's absolutely right. I think that's a really biblical thing to say. And the Bible just goes on to say, good news, good news. God is entirely and utterly and exactly and precisely like Jesus Christ, the God who came and stooped and suffered and bled and died for us. This is the kind of God that Jesus is. I'm not trying to sell to you the institution of religion or the concept of deity. I'm not really into the institution of religion or the concept of deity. I'm quite like that woman who doesn't believe in marriage, but then she finds Mr. Right, and what happens? You know, they get married. Now, why? Because she believes in marriage? No. Because she believes in him. It's the same. It's the same. Christians will tell you it's the same with them. It's not that they're so enamored with the institution of religion. Nobody in this room is enamored with the institution of religion, be honest. But we found Mr. Right. We found a God who proves his deity by bleeding for us. It is utterly unique. In the history of religions, some religions will say that there were gods who came and they mucked around on planet Earth, and some of them died in battles and things like that, but they're not the kind of loving, self-giving deities that you want to give your life to. In other religions, the gods are very distant and would never come and die for you. Here is the God that you want to believe in. Here is a God of light and life and love, a source, a fountain of life, who comes to give you life to the full, and he proves that he is that God by bleeding for you. And actually you then start to think, of course that's the proof. Of course that's the proof that he is the fountain of life. He pours himself out with every drop of his blood. If God's not like that, don't give me God. If God is not like this one, bleeding for the world, I'm not particularly fussed about God at that stage. You know, when I was at university, I think I called myself a Christian in first and second year. I think I did. But I really was not that interested in Christianity, really wasn't that interested in my faith in any way, shape or form, because I basically had a concept of God as some distant deity, high on power, low on personality. That kind of figure did not capture my heart. What captured my heart was reading through the Gospels and meeting this one, who bleeds his own heart's blood for me, who loves me more than his own life, who'd rather die for me than live without me. At that stage you go, if that's not what God's like, God ought to be like that. It's the sort of thing where you don't so much say it's too good to be true, you start to say it's so good it must be true. If there is a God, he must be like this. This God, who says, I am the good shepherd. How does he prove it? He says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. That's how he proves that he's the good shepherd. Stunning, isn't it? Just think about what Jesus is describing here. He's describing a shepherd who is so enamored of his stinking sheep that, let's imagine that, a wolf comes to chase poor Flossie at the bottom of the field. And can you imagine this shepherd just kind of running down the field and saying, no, Flossie, and then slow motion kind of flinging himself in front of Flossie and saying, run, save yourself. And he gets mauled to death by a wolf, dies for stupid, moronic, stupid, stinking Flossie. And you think, what kind of shepherd is this? I mean, a good shepherd shows up early and mends the fences. I mean, this shepherd is far too invested in his job, don't you think? What kind of shepherd dies for his sheep? But you see, this is the point. This is why Jesus has come. He has come to die for us. He has come to put himself in our position. Because we are like sheep. Did you notice that in this illustration? If he's calling himself the good shepherd, what are we like? What are we like? We are sheep. Are you offended by that? You probably should be. Probably should be insulted by that. Think of all the animals that Jesus could liken you to. He doesn't call you a majestic lion. He doesn't call you a soaring eagle. He calls you a sheep. Sheep are moronic. And Jesus is saying, you are spiritually stupid. You chase after the next thing, and you follow after other people who don't know where they're going, and they lead you astray. And then you turn and you follow the next sheep who doesn't know where it's going, and it leads you astray. It's a verse from the Old Testament that says, we are all like sheep going astray. Each of us turn from our own way. We're all turning from God's way, and we're just following one another. Don't you notice that? We all like to think of ourselves as free agents. I'm just going after freedom. But actually, we're just following the latest fads and fashions. Of course we are. At university, I remember it was parties. Did you go to that party? Yeah, I went to that party. And you try to compete with one another about, these various things. It's like that old YouTube video. I chummed it everywhere. It's that whole, and you compete with each other about that. And then I remember that was my whole thing. And then I desperately wanted to play cricket, okay? Desperately. Wanted to play it professionally. I wanted to get into the Wisden Cricketing Almanac. Does anyone know what the Wisden is? Any of you tragic enough to know the Wisden Cricketing Almanac? It's like a 1,000-page book of all the most significant cricket matches that have happened in the year. And I was desperate to get into this book. And yet, I spent my entire life chasing after this dream. And I am here to tell you that I am in the 136th edition of the Wisden Cricketing Almanac. I am on page 886. I'm halfway down in 6-point font. And my name is misspelt. Moronic! We are spiritually moronic. We're just shit. We're just following after this thing. And then you get to third year and you decide, I better clean up my act and look for a job. And then you delete all your Facebook profile pictures from the last 3 years because that's not going to help you get a career. And then, let me tell you, when you get beyond university, you just compete with one another over the stupidest things, like how many hours you work. I worked 60 hours this week. I worked 70 hours this week. I wore a nappy to the office just to save on bathroom breaks. That's how, and you compete on these things. And then you change again because family life comes and then you just compete on horror stories about your children. I've spent the last 2 years of my life blowing on food. That's all I've done for the last 2 years, saying it's not hot. Look, That's what you do. And you just chase after the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us have turned to our own way. And the whole time, the good shepherd is going, I know your why. I know your reason. You don't know your reason. I know your reason. Will you trust me? I am the God who died for you. I have come to give you life to the full. Will you stop following yourselves? And will you start following me? See, when Jesus says he dies for these sheep, he is the good shepherd who gives his life for the sheep, he's picking up this image of the sacrificial lamb from the Old Testament. I'll finish with this. In the Old Testament, if you had been spiritually stupid, if you had looked for love in all the wrong places and it had harmed people, what would you do? You would go to the temple and you would bring with you a sheep. And it was a sacrifice. And you would queue up before the priest and you would get to the front of the queue and the priest would make you lay your hands on the head of the sheep and you would confess your sins onto the head of the sheep. And it was this idea that you were identifying with your sacrifice, that you were putting all that nonsense, all that junk, all that spiritual stupidity onto poor Flossie. And then you bind the lamb and you put it on the altar and Flossie gets it in the neck. And at that point you think, poor Flossie, right? What did Flossie ever do to deserve that? And that's exactly the point. Flossie did nothing to deserve that. You did everything to deserve it. But Flossie dies in your place and you go home free. Now, none of this in the Old Testament did anything spiritually. It was all pageantry. It was all theatre. But it was all teaching the most incredible truth. Because all throughout the Old Testament, the belief was that the good shepherd would come and he would die as the lamb. The Messiah would come and he would die as our sacrifice. So now think of the cross. You know what's happening at the cross? Jesus is carrying your spiritual stupidity on himself. And with his arms wide open to the world, he is bleeding out forgiveness. Because he's carrying the can for all your sins. You can imagine in the world that Ken lives in, you know, perhaps a department in a large bank and somebody's made a mistake and the head of the department says, I'm going to carry the can for that. It happened on my watch. I didn't do it personally, but I'm going to carry the can for it. We recognize that there are such things as noble bankers, don't we? Sometimes, every now and again, there might be. Let's mythologically believe that might be the case. Okay, there is someone who decides they're going to take responsibility for what has happened under them. This is Jesus coming into his world, the good shepherd. He sees the stupid sheep and he says, I'm going to take it on me. I'm going to carry the can. And as he bleeds on that cross, he is dying as our substitute, as our sacrifice, to take away our sins. And he rises up again and he says, I've been your lamb. Will you let me be your shepherd? And I just want to leave you with that. Jesus, in this verse, he says he's your shepherd and he's your lamb. And you need both. You need a lamb to forgive you for your spiritual stupidity. You do need that. Ken's been speaking about it. No amount of money in the world can buy you the forgiveness that Jesus offers for free. As your lamb, he offers you forgiveness. And as your good shepherd, he offers to lead you. He offers to guide you. He offers to give you your why. Do you want that? There's many people in this room who want that, and they want it now. And so I'm just going to ask us all to bow our heads. Can we all just bow our heads? And I would love if you've been responding to the Jesus that Ken was speaking about, the Jesus of John's Gospel, and you want Jesus as your lamb, and you want him as your leader, your good shepherd. I'm just going to offer some words that you might want to say to Jesus. The words are not magic, but they're just one way that you could respond to the good shepherd tonight, and you could finally sort out this issue of your reason, your meaning, knowing your why. Let me pray. You can echo silently in your heart. Dear Jesus, I recognize that so often I'm lost. I just follow after the latest thing. And I don't know my why. Jesus, thank you for dying for me. as my Lamb. Thank you for your sacrifice on the cross. Thank you for rising again as my Lord, as my leader, as my shepherd. I want to follow you. Lead me now. Lead me into fruitfulness and life to the full. Amen.